Afternoon, everyone. This is Jerry Isley again, and we're welcome to tea. I just left my teacup in the other room, so I'm coming out now just to talk to you. If you'd like tea, I can get some afterwards, and we can have our discussion over a cup. If you have your own cup, bring it along. We're in cyberspace, so we can do anything. We can even be more than in one place at one time. We can be in two places at one time, especially if you have an iPhone and an iPad. Today is tea time, and today it's 4, and we're going to be talking about the Little Lame Prince again. And tomorrow we will be continuing at 3 for tea time, and we may vary it and have an object to curate or to talk about. And we'll be coming back toward the weekend to Little Lame Prince again for the kids for the weekend. So all you parents, adults, and children gather around, and we're going to talk about the Little Lame Prince. As you remember, we talked yesterday, we're going to be reading chapter 8, and yesterday we learned about the lark that stood out of her, that always hung around outside his tower, his prison, and sang to him. And I think I told you all about my pet quail called Petey, who would always call to me every morning. And he'd want to be let out one time a day to fly around in freedom. He'd fly in a big circle, come back and land on my shoulder or my dad's shoulder. So that's a little bit like the Little Prince. The thing we saw yesterday is the magic traveling cloak took him to over a city. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday, and I'm going to talk about it tonight too. If you would fly over New York City right now, you would see it a bit like the Prince. The city looks beautiful and pristine, and yet parts of it are not. But with the coronavirus, there's nothing going on, so the city looks like a city on a hill, or a city in heaven, or a heavenly city. An urban metropolis with beautiful sculptural buildings, but no people in it. That's a little bit the way the Prince saw cities. And, and as I mentioned last night, after listening to the Berlin Philharmonic, we talked about some of Gershwin's favorite tunes in American in Paris. It was called Americans in Berlin last night. And they did show tunes from Gershwin and other things, Porgy and Bess. And there was kind of a narrative that went with it, and that's sort of very similar to what the Little Prince experienced yesterday. And you remember, Little Prince can't walk, so he can't go down and be part of what's going on below. But he can sit up on this cloud, or this rug, it isn't a rug, it's his traveling cloak, and see the world goes up through a skylight and out. Excuse me, it's a lot of pollen. I would like a skylight over my bed, and I could fly out. When I went to Russia, we were staying at the most wonderful place. It's called Agora House, and it was in the attic of an old 18th century, huge Russian building. Beautiful interiors, beautiful big rooms, but the Agora House was a dormitory hidden up under the attic, under the roof. And each room had a skylight. The problem with the skylights is that they leaked sometimes and the rain would come in. But we could open them when it wasn't raining, we could open them, we could wash our clothes and hang them under the skylight, and they would dry by afternoon, even though it was very humid in St. Petersburg in the summer. It was a way for ventilation, it was a way for the outside world to come in. And I can see very much how much the Little Lame Prince enjoyed getting out through the skylight and getting out and seeing the world. There's an interesting book that was written in the 80s about postmodernism, and it was talking about breaking through the skylight, breaking a barrier. And that's what we're doing right now with the coronavirus. I'm going to read chapter 8, and then we'll go from there and talk a little bit about what is home. If you want to hear some beautiful music, go to Voce 8 And there's their new album. They have a preview of their new album. It's Voce 8, Roman numeral 3, Redemption. And it starts, it's part of a series of silence. At the beginning, there's a quote by Aldous Huxley, which is quite wonderful, about after the silence comes music. And at the end, he talks about becoming a child again. And that's getting a little bit close to what we're reading here in The Little Lame Prince. So let me go on here. And hello, everyone. Good to have you all with me today. Chapter 8. What, I wonder, would be most people's idea of a king? What was Prince Dolar's? Perhaps a very splendid personage with a crown on his head and a scepter in his hand, sitting on a throne and judging the people, always doing right and never wrong. I have not seen it, and therefore I cannot. Crown on his head, a scepter in his hand, judging the people, always doing right, never wrong. A king can do no wrong, was a law laid down in olden times. Never cross or tired or sick or suffering, perfectly handsome, well-dressed, calm, tempered, ready to see, hear everyone, and discourteous to nobody. All things always going well with him, and nothing unpleasant ever happens. This probably was what Prince Dolar expected to see, but what did he see? But I must tell you how he saw it. Ah, said the magpie, no levee today, the king is ill. Though his majesty does not wish it to be generally known, it would be so inconvenient. He can't see you, but perhaps you might like to go and take a look at him in a way I often do. It's so very amusing. Remember the magpie, the talking magpie, all these talking birds. Yesterday there was a woodpecker, the biggest woodpecker. I thought my neighbors were doing construction, and he was out there looking for bugs in the tree. It's a little bit like a talking magpie. That's kind of like that. The prince was just now too much excited to talk much. Was he not going to see the king, his uncle, who succeeded his father and dethroned himself? Had stepped into all the pleasant things that he, Prince Dolar, ought to have had, and shut him up in a desolate tower? Not very fair. What was he like, this great, bad, clever man? Had he got all the things he wanted, which another ought to have had, and did he enjoy them? Nobody knows, answered the magpie. just as if she'd been sitting inside the prince's heart instead of on top of his shoulder. Do you know friends like that, where they know your heart and it surprises you? It's important to let friends like that in. He is a king, and that's enough. For the rest, nobody knows. As she spoke, Mag flew down onto the palace roof, where the cloak had rested, settling down between the great stacks of chimneys, as comfortable as if on the ground. She pecked at the tiles with her beak. Truly, she was a wonderful bird, and immediately the little hole opened, a sort of door, through which can be seen distinctly the chamber below. Now look in, my prince. Make haste, for I must soon shut it up again. But the boy hesitated. Isn't it rude? Won't they think us intruding? Oh dear, no. There's a hole like this in every palace. Dozens of holes, indeed. Everybody knows it, but nobody speaks of it. Intrusion. Why, though the royal family are supposed to live shut up behind stone walls ever so thick, all the world knows that they live in a glass house where everybody can see them and throw a stone at them. Now pop down on your knees and take a peep at His Majesty. That's very funny. I have a friend who's a psychiatrist, and she said, you know, when all is said and done, everybody knows everything that's going on. Everybody may deny it, but they kind of know what's going on in the situation, especially in dysfunction. Now peep at His Majesty. His Majesty, the prince gazed eagerly down into a large room, the largest room he had ever beheld, with furniture and hangings grander than anything he could have ever imagined. A stray sunbeam coming through the crevice in the darkened window struck it across the carpet, and it was the loveliest carpet ever woven, just like a bed of flowers to walk over, only nobody walked over it, the room being perfectly empty and silent. "Where is the king?" asked the puzzled boy. "There," said the magpie, pointing with one wrinkled, that's me, one wrinkled claw to a magnificent bed, enough to contain 6 people. Wouldn't that be fun? I can show you the bed here. I'm up close. There's the bed. How about that? It's pretty amazing. I've decided to have my bed in the middle of the room. I like it. His is a little off to the side. In the center of it, just visible under the silken counterpane, quite straight and still, with its head on the lace pillow, lay a small figure, something like waxwork, fast asleep, very fast asleep. There were a number of sparkling rings on the tiny yellow hands that were curled a little helplessly, like a baby's, outside the coverlet. The eyes were shut, the nose looked sharp and thin, and the long gray beard hid the mouth and lay over the breast. A sight not ugly nor threatening or frightening, only solemn and quiet. And so very silent, 2 little flies buzzing about the curtains of the bed being the only audible sound. I'm sorry, I have a heater on today. It's cold in our house, so that's not a fly, that's the heater. "Is that the king?" whispered Prince Dolar. "Yes," replied the magpie. Had he been angry, furiously angry, ever since he knew how his uncle had taken the crown? Had he been angry, furiously angry, ever since he knew his uncle had taken the crown and sent him, a poor little helpless child, to be shut up for life, just as if he's been dead? Many times the boy has felt as if, king as he was, he should like to strike him, this great, strong, wicked man. Why, you might as well have struck a baby. How helpless he lay, with his eyes shut, his idle hands folded. They made no work to do, bad or good. "What is the matter with him?" asked the prince again. "He is dead," said the magpie, with a croak. "He is dead." No, there was not the least use in being angry with him now. On the contrary, the prince felt almost sorry for him, except that he looked so peaceful, with all his cares at rest. And this was being dead. So even kings die? Well, he hadn't had an easy life, folks say, for all of his grandeur. Perhaps he's glad it is over. "Goodbye, Your Majesty." With another tap of her beak, Mistress Mag shut down the little door in the tiles, and Prince Dolar's first and last sight of his uncle was ended. He sat in the center of his traveling cloak, silent and thoughtful. "What shall we do now?" said the magpie. "There's nothing much more to be done with His Majesty except a fine funeral, which I shall certainly go to see." "All the world will. He interested the world exceedingly when he was alive, and he ought to do it now that he's dead, just once more. And since he can't hear me, I may as well say that on the whole, His Majesty is much better dead than alive, if we can only get somebody in his place. There'll be such a row in the city presently. Suppose we float up again and see it all at a safe distance, though. It would be so much fun." What would be fun? A revolution. Whether anybody except a magpie would call it fun, I don't know, but it certainly was a remarkable scene. As soon as the cathedral bell began to toll and the minute guns to fire and announcing to the kingdom that it was without a king, the people gathered in crowds, stopping at street corners to talk together. The murmur now and then rose into a shout, and a shout into a roar. When Prince Dolar, quietly floating in the upper air, caught the sound of their different and opposite cries, it seemed to him as if the whole city had gone mad together. Long live the king! The king is dead. Down with the king. Down with the crown and the king too. Hurrah for the republic. Hurrah for no government at all. This sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Sounds like everybody's saying if we ever get out of this coronavirus, we want to just do away with everything. Because they're all corrupt, nobody's done the right thing. When you children are grown men and women, or before, you will hear and read in books about what we call revolutions. Earnestly I trust that neither I nor you may ever see one. But they have happened and may happen again in other countries besides no man's land, when wicked kings have helped to make their people wicked too, or out of an unrighteous nation have sprung rulers equally bad, or without either of these causes, when a restless country has fancied any change better than no change at all. For me, I don't like changes unless pretty sure they're there for the good. And how good can come out of absolute evil, the horrible evil that went on this night under Prince Dolar's very eyes? Soldiers shooting down people by the hundreds in the streets, scaffolds erected, heads dropping off, houses burned, women and children murdered. This is more than I can understand. It sounds like the French Revolution. But all these things you will find in history, my children, and must by and by judge for yourselves the right and wrong of them, as far as anybody ever can judge. Prince Dolar now had seen it all. Things happened so fast, one after another, they quite confused his faculties. "Oh, let me go home," he cried at last, stopping his ears and shutting his eyes. Only let me go home, for even his lonely tower seemed home, and its dreariness and silence absolute paradise after all this. "Goodbye, then," said the magpie, flapping her wings. She had been chatting incessantly all day and all night, for it was actually thus long that Prince Dolar had been hovering over the city, neither eating nor sleeping, with all these terrible things happening under his very eyes. "You've had enough, I suppose, of seeing the world." "Oh, I have, cried the prince with a shudder. "That is, till the next time." "All right, your royal highness, you don't know me, but I know you. We may meet again sometime." She looked at him with her clear, piercing eyes, sharp enough to see through everything, and it seemed as if they changed from bird's eyes to human eyes, the very eyes of his godmother, whom he had not seen for ever so long. But the minute afterward she became only a bird, and with a screech and a chatter, spread her wings and flew away. Prince Dolar fell into a kind of swoon of utter misery, bewilderment, and exhaustion. And when he awoke, he found himself in his own room, alone and quiet, with the dawn just breaking, and the long rim of yellow light in the horizon glimmering through the window panes. Thus endeth the lesson. We have finished chapter 8, and we will do chapter 9 tomorrow. But I want to talk a little bit about home. There's a wonderful, I mentioned this earlier, there's this wonderful Voce 8, and they are an English group, as much as I can tell, graduates from Cambridge, Oxford, and they sometimes do work with the Ancient Music Society. And I think it's worth listening to. A lot of it's a cappella. And their new album, the preview of their new album, is on YouTube. Again, it's called Silence, Roman numeral 3, Redemption. And they do this amazing Bach piece, and one of their singers actually did a an arrangement for 6 voices a cappella, and with some stringed instruments of one of Mahler's works, and it had been transcribed down to 12 voices. He took it down to 6, and then they did a Bach cantata. It was just absolutely so wonderful because it was all spare and cut down to smaller size. When I was growing up, we went to a lot of classical concerts, and it was more of a Victorian thing, I think. I wasn't Victorian, but classical music was still about huge orchestras and kind of heavy weighted music. I remember going to one concert, it was an organ concert, and in the middle of it there was a pause, and there was so much music on the organ console, it all fell down and made a terrible crash on the keys. I thought, that's the trouble. It's classical music is imploding in on itself. It's become so heavy and heavy-handed. So now today we're more into minimalism, and these recordings are really quite wonderful. But I was thinking last night, there's a song, it's called The Long Road Home. They preview it at the beginning and they do it at the end and give you a taste of what's coming in the album. And it's the most beautiful, beautiful, poignant, haunting sound. It's called, I believe it's called the Road to Home, or The Long Road Home. And I was thinking about what home is. What did the Little Prince, he thought, he kind of knew that he was a king. So he wondered what a palace was like. And so the magpie showed him what a palace looked like. And I think all of us try to long for home. I had no home for 2 years. I had no parents. And I was in a prison tower, very much like the Little Lame Prince, in a orphanage hospital ward. I always wanted a home. Home is really important to me. And every time my folks would want to move from where we lived, I said, oh no, we would look around, get really excited, then we'd come back and say, oh no, we just love being here. And I think for me it was a sign of permanence. And I think that's what the little king is looking for now that he's older. He wants some connection, especially with his mother. And he was able to see, with the magpie, see into some of the attic rooms. The one room where his mother died, I'm not sure if he knew that was where it was, but he felt really sad, and it had a beautiful view. It had a high view of the beautiful mountains. And he lived beyond the desert. He was exiled beyond the desert and pronounced dead by the prince. And the prince has now just died, or the king has now died. It was his uncle. And Prince Dolar is named after his favorite godmother, who was very sweet and always looked after him and provided him with this amazing traveling cloak. Once it opened, it was like a magic carpet, and he could go up through a skylight and out into the world, into the sky. And now he's looking down on the palace. He looked at city streets, and there was no one in them, just like New York has been. And it all looked idealistic. And then after he saw the king was dead, he wanted to go home. He was ready to go back home. So what is home? I think many of us consider home very much like this, again, this professional portrait. We can recreate ourselves and make ourselves look the way we want to look. And for home, for us, is the appearance we have toward others. What kind of life we've constructed, what goods we have around us, what furniture we have around us. I love artifacts, and I love artifacts that are connected with stories. That's why I love reading all these things. And my whole house is full of artifacts that bring on a memory of something else, or someone that I loved, or someone that's taken really good care of me. My first definition of home was when I fell in love and married Twyla, and I'm going to show you this picture. This is what I would describe as one of my first glimpses of home. I've shown this to you before, but I'm going to show it to you a little bit more closely. This is Twyla and I. We were about 35. I was 35. She was 27. And it's in New York City. Our friends, Greg Mitchell, who was a ballet dancer on Broadway, Spider-Woman, with Chita Rivera, and my friend Eric Weichardt, who was a ballet dancer with American Ballet Theater, surprised us. We were going through New York, just like everybody went through New York and brought in coronavirus. We were going out of New York on a trip to Ireland the first time, and Twyla is Irish, loves Ireland, and I just thought you'd like to see this, because this is my definition of home. And as I mentioned, this was the time when we were actually going to the apartment of an actor friend of ours, Michael Beck, who was in a lot of movies early on in the 70s. And this is the two of us, and we had discovered just before we took this trip that we were expecting our first daughter, Rachel. So this is home for me when we knew we were going to have our first child, and we were madly in love and went to Ireland, and it was so so wonderful. It was so wonderful because all the taxi drivers in at least then in the 70s, because Ireland had been so depopulated because of the famine, anybody who was pregnant they would take and have her sit down and wait on her and usher her into the limousine. Anyway, this was the limousine. We were disconnected, we're back. Anyway, so there's what my definition of home was the first time. So my wife, as all of you know probably, succumbed to dementia after 12 years. And she was taken away from me 4 years ago. She was taken away from me many years before that, but she died 4 years ago. And since then, I've learned some things about my birth parents. And one of them is that we have an ancestral home. Now, kings have ancestral homes. Like kingdoms will fall, revolutions will take the palaces and use them for something else. Like in Russia, which was an absolute monarchy, Peter the Great built a palace, and then Catherine the Great built the Hermitage and buried Peter the Great's Hermitage, which was before it. And in 1980, I think about 86, it's the Hermitage Museum right now. And in the Winter Palace, it was the Winter Palace. There was a summer palace outside of St. Petersburg, about a day's ride by horseback. They were working on the theater. Catherine the Great had a small theater put in. And she had a really famous architect, and she was an absolute tyrant, and absolute tyrants didn't get anything done because they basically have slaves and they make people work when they don't want to work, and if they don't get the job done, they don't live. A little bit like the king, the wicked king. So one day the workmen were working on the floor of the theater in the Catherine Palace, and somebody fell through a hole, and underneath was a street, like a cobblestone street where carriages would come, and kind of a landing with stone. And so they dug down and opened it up, and now you can go on a tour. It's really wonderful. If you get a chance, you need to do it. It's underneath the Catherine Theater, and it's it's really incredible. It is Peter the Great's smaller palace. That was his ancestral home that he built. And we had a special tour. You go underneath. It's the most amazing thing. It's all intact. It turns out that the architect was asked to build the wing on the Hermitage within a year or two, and he had to work so fast. He had to get it up because she demanded what she wanted, and she got what she wanted. And it turns out that she wanted Peter the Great's Hermitage to be torn down, and I think the architect felt kind of bad, and besides he didn't have time to do that and build what she needed and have it done. So he just built over it. So you can see where the boat came in from the Neva and got off, and you could go into his palace. Well, the palace is intact, and Russia saves artifacts of every king. It's like I save artifacts of everything. Anyway, my home is my palace. What can I say? Anyway, so I got a special tour. The keeper of the clocks in the Hermitage, there are hundreds of them, came in and showed us some clocks that Peter the Great invented, and his desk, and I was able to actually pick up a periscope that he had invented. He was quite an inventor. They even have his pet dog stuffed down in there. So you can actually go in and see what Peter the Great did and how he lived. And so they preserved that. That's my idea of a palace. Well, I found out I have an ancestral home in Wales. And I've been near it, but I've never been to it. And this is an amazing book. It's called Castles in the Air by Judy Corbett. And it tells a story. When I was in the 70s, I was in London, and I remember a constructivist artist, he did, it was really interesting work. Interesting is not a good word. It was very modern work and with almost Dali-esque features to it. Well, it turned out later, I saw the work in the 70s and didn't know there was any connection, and then just accidentally found out about this house through discovering some birth mother relatives. And this is our ancestral home. It's the Gwyn ancestral estate. So this is what the Little Lame Prince was looking for, is what was his home like, the place where his mother lived. And as a king, it defined who he was. So most of us in America don't have kings. So what we do to create an ancestral home, we'll make one look like it. So all we have is paint, plaster, and wood. And then we end up with a perfect picture of what we think we should live in. Now that's all changed since the coronavirus. We can't just invent ourselves. But the Little Lame Prince didn't want to reinvent himself. He wanted to know why he was there and who he was. And, you know, it says, the home is every man's castle. And, you know, poor Little Lame Prince was in a tower in prison. And sometimes when we build our houses too big, they become a prison. We can't escape them. I have many friends who have huge estates, and for those to be maintained from generation to generation is a career just unto itself, and it constantly has a enormous hunger for money. This Castles in the Air talks about them renovating my family home and how they just have to do it when they could. And even now, you can go visit it, it's a B&B, but we've not been able to coordinate it. We wanted to spend Christmas there a couple of years when we found out, because I think Christmas in Wales would be wonderful, especially after the book that was named the story. Anyway, it turns out that they could only do what they could afford to do. And one time they wanted to rent it out. They said a movie company wanted to rent it out, and it was for dungeon attire, and so they had to turn it down. Another time they had Japanese tourists walking through as she came down for tea in her robe and about 4 sweaters. So we wanted to go at Christmas, but it's just too cold. They close it down in the winter. She said, you really don't want to be there in the winter. 2 years ago they had a flood and almost lost the gardens. The gardens are 400 years old, and they have yew trees that were planted by Elizabeth I. And the cool thing is they have peacocks. Peacocks have roamed the property for 400 years. And Abigail and Nathan just recently stayed at a B&B that had a baby peacock. I just love peacocks. I'd like to have them here, but they're really messy, and you have to clean up after them like cows. They really are something else. So, and they make a lot of noise, but they're really beautiful. But if anybody ever thought that God was not involved in creation, all you have to look to do is see a male pheasant or a male peacock. The markings and the colorings are just breathtaking. So folks, now that we've all been isolated in our prison castles, I just want to encourage you to begin to think about what your life will be like when the restrictions are lifted a bit. We will not go back to normal or even a new normal. And in fact, I said this last night and I'm saying it again to you parents and to your kids too. I had a young friend who has 4 babies, more or less, about 2 years apart. And he was saying, well, you know, things will get better, but then I'll go back to my busyness, and I've really enjoyed being with my children. I said, stop. The word busyness is a choice. That needs to be kicked out of your vocabulary. You volunteered to be a victim of busyness. And yes, you have to make a living, you have to do this, you have to do that. But we volunteer to be victims of our own circumstances. We volunteer to build a house that's too big that we can't manage. We spend too much money with our credit cards. So in all these things, we volunteer for a lot of things that we end up thinking we're victims of. We may think we're victims of this coronavirus. Well, we are in one sense. It is also an opportunity for us to be creative and I think it answers the question that most people say, well, God must have created evil. Why does God allow evil? I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm willing to let that go, because God doesn't, and sometimes God does stop evil, sometimes he doesn't. The other thing is, does God play favorites? Why is John the disciple always called the disciple Jesus loved? I'm doing some research on it. So in all these things that seem unfair, we have this something in us that says, oh, that's unfair. It's a part of our humanity. But God has a different economy, and so he can't, in all cases, prevent tragedy, and he can't always prevent suffering. But it can be redemptive. We can redeem it by what we choose to do and how we rebuild our lives. And in all cases, no matter how much pain or suffering we go through, our Lord Jesus went through it even more and went. There's something just very powerful, and I'm going to do the interview. I have to record it. I can't go live like this. In the studio of an artist friend of mine, and it's The Harrowing of Hell, and it shows, it comes from the Creed, the part that everybody skips over. On the third day he rose again, and he descended into hell. Third day he rose again and ascended into heaven. Everybody skips over that. And so he's done a painting called The Harrowing of Hell, of Christ going down into hell and rescuing people and defeating Satan. It's really incredible, and it's like a Renaissance painting, but with almost constructivist, just really lots of really interesting geometric colors and things coming out. So I will be interviewing Ed Nippers with that, and probably it may be next Sunday. I will do it during tea time, because I usually curate things from time to time and on tea time. So anyway, love to have you all come if you can, and don't forget tonight at 7, we're going to, I've been collecting a lot of thoughts out of The Horse and His Boy before we start next. I'm going to read an introductory chapter of Prince Caspian and see if that's something that we want to do next. But stick with me. We will do that or The Silver Chair. Not sure yet. In any case, last night I thought for a long time about my friend who knew C.S. Lewis, and he was much like him. And I will tell you tonight what the most amazing discovery about Rabbadash and C.S. Lewis and ourselves. So stay tuned tonight at 7, and I will be just doing an introductory chapter for Prince Caspian, but also reflecting on some things that I've been thinking about, along with this portrait and the back of it, and what we're to do in this crisis, and how we are to be as a nation and as individuals. And I just wanted to share my thoughts with you, and I thought it would be really nice if you could all come along. So I hope you have a wonderful day. Everything is posted on my Facebook page, and it'll also be transferred and posted on YouTube, under Glenfeather Hall on YouTube, at youtube.com. So thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon, and the sun is coming out. I feel better already. Have a good evening. Bye.